France. The Eiffel Tower piercing a lavender sky. Cobblestone streets lined with patisseries. A glass of Bordeaux catching the golden afternoon light. This is the France the world dreams about. 68 million tourists flood through its borders every year, more than any other nation on Earth. They come for the luxury, the fashion, the romance. But what if the postcard is lying? Behind the croissants and couture, the French middle class is quietly disappearing. Wages have flatlined, taxes have become crushing, and a national debt is spiraling toward a cliff that could shake all of Europe. This is the story of why France is poorer than you think. Let's start with the number everyone ignores. France's GDP per capita, the wealth generated per person, has been stagnating for nearly 2 decades. In the year 2000, the average French citizen produced about $37,000 worth of economic output. Today, it's around $46,000. That sounds like growth, right? Pay attention to this. Germany went from 34,000 to 54,000 in the same period. The United States, from 46,000 to over 80,000. France isn't just growing slowly, it's falling behind. But here's where it gets interesting. The French aren't lazy, they're not unproductive. In fact, French workers are among the most productive in the world per hour worked. The problem is structural, and it has a name: smicardization. The SMIC is France's minimum wage. And over the past 20 years, something disturbing has happened. More and more workers have become trapped at or near that minimum. In 2005, about 12% of French workers earned the minimum wage. By 2023, that number had exploded to nearly 18%. That's nearly 1 in 5 workers stuck at the bottom rung with nowhere to climb. And this is extremely important. When the minimum wage rises, which it does automatically with inflation in France, companies don't raise everyone else's wages to match. So the gap between minimum wage workers and middle-class workers keeps shrinking. The middle is being squeezed from below. Now here's the kicker. France has one of the highest tax burdens in the developed world. The government takes nearly 47% of GDP in taxes. Compare that to Germany at 39%, or the United States at 27%. Where does all that money go? The French welfare state is enormous. Healthcare, education, unemployment benefits, pensions. It's a comprehensive safety net that many French citizens deeply value. But the math is starting to break. France's national debt has crossed 3 trillion euros. That's over 110% of the country's entire annual economic output. To understand how serious this is, imagine earning 60,000 euros a year, but owing 66,000 euros on your credit card, with interest payments eating more of your paycheck every month. That's France right now. And the interest payments alone are becoming the government's largest expense, larger than education, larger than defense. Oh, wait, I haven't even talked about what happened to French industry. In 1980, manufacturing made up nearly 25% of the French economy. Today, less than 10%. Entire regions that once built cars, textiles, and machinery have become economic wastelands. The factories closed, the jobs vanished, the young people left, and the workers who stayed? Many found themselves pushed toward that minimum wage floor we talked about. From skilled manufacturing jobs paying 30 euros an hour to service jobs paying 11. This brings us to the yellow vests. In 2018, when President Macron proposed a fuel tax increase in the name of climate policy, something snapped. Hundreds of thousands of French citizens took to the streets, wearing the yellow safety vests that all French drivers are required to keep in their cars. It wasn't really about the fuel tax. That was just the spark. The powder keg was decades of economic stagnation that Paris elites never seem to notice or care about. The protests lasted for months. Macron eventually backed down on the fuel tax, but the underlying anger hasn't gone anywhere. And then came the pension crisis. In 2023, Macron pushed through a deeply unpopular reform, raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. He bypassed Parliament entirely using an emergency constitutional provision. Millions took to the streets again. Garbage piled up as sanitation workers struck. Refineries shut down. The country felt like it was tearing at the seams. But here's what nobody tells you. Macron had no choice. The pension system was, and still is, a ticking time bomb. France has one of the most generous retirement systems in the developed world, but it's funded by current workers paying for current retirees. In 1970, there were 4 workers for every retiree. Today, there are fewer than 2, and that ratio keeps falling as the population ages. Without reform, the system would have collapsed within a generation. But try explaining demographic math to a 58-year-old who's been promised retirement at 62 their whole working life. This is the French paradox at its core. A country that demands both generous benefits and low taxes, extensive government services, and minimal government debt. Early retirement and a sustainable pension system. You can't have all of these things. The math doesn't work. But French politics has spent decades pretending otherwise. And that's when everything changed. In 2024, rating agencies downgraded French government debt for the first time in years. The market was finally losing confidence. Pay attention to this. For decades, France benefited from something called the flight to quality. When global markets got nervous, investors would buy French and German bonds because they were considered safe. But now, the gap between French and German borrowing costs is widening. Investors are starting to treat France more like Italy or Spain than like Germany. This matters because higher borrowing costs mean more money going to interest payments, which means less money for everything else, which means either deeper cuts or higher taxes, which means more protests, which means more instability, which means higher borrowing costs. It's a doom loop, and France is walking right into it. Now, some might say I'm being too pessimistic. France still has the 7th largest economy in the world. It has world-class companies like LVMH, Total Energies, and Airbus. It has nuclear power plants providing cheap, clean electricity. All of that is true. France is not about to collapse. But here's the thing. Decline isn't always dramatic. It's often slow, grinding, almost invisible. You don't notice it until one day you look around and realize that the country you grew up in has somehow gotten smaller. That's what's happening in France. Not a crisis, not a collapse. Just a slow erosion of what used to be possible. A generation ago, a young French person could expect to do better than their parents. Today, that expectation is gone. The dream of upward mobility has been replaced by the reality of just getting by. The villages are emptying, the factories are silent, the middle class is shrinking, and Paris keeps throwing parties like nothing is wrong. So what's the solution, honestly? There isn't an easy one. France could embrace painful reforms, cutting spending, raising the retirement age further, making labor markets more flexible. But every time a government tries, the streets erupt. French citizens have grown accustomed to a certain quality of life, and they're willing to fight for it, even if fighting for it might make things worse in the long run. Maybe France will find a new economic engine, technology, green energy, something we haven't imagined yet. Maybe the European Union will find a way to spread the burden more evenly. Or maybe France will simply continue its slow fade, becoming a beautiful museum of what used to be possible in the 20th century. I think we can all learn something from this story. Whether or not you live in France, prosperity isn't permanent. It requires constant maintenance, difficult choices, and sometimes the willingness to give up things you love in order to preserve something greater. Every nation faces this test eventually. Some pass, some fail. France is being tested right now. The question isn't whether France will survive, it will. The question is whether France can rediscover the ambition that once made it great, or whether it will settle for being a comfortable place to slowly grow old. That's something only the French can decide.